I'm gonna lay this one down. It's, you know, I mean, technique. Oh my goodness, dude, that's a big one. Stay on there.
Honestly, you'll catch fish that you won't catch on almost anything else because almost everything else is going to be under them. To fish anything else that's truly going to stay above their head, you'd have to fish it really fast. We kind of pigeonholed a suspending jerk bait as only being good in the pre-spawn. We certainly know now that that is not the case. Hey everybody, we're back here in the garage going over the technique of the month, and we're into that time of the year. February is a great month, and the fishing really, in my opinion, starts picking up, and you've got an opportunity to catch some big ones in February. And March is my single favorite month of the year, no doubt about it. So this is a lot of fun, and so many different techniques and thoughts and ways that you can start catching bass really this time of the year. So I love fishing, this time of the year. It's getting to where we're starting to see evidence of spring, and it's going to finally warm up again, hopefully. But yeah, March is definitely a fun month to get bites, catch a lot of fish, and catch a lot of big ones. And some of my biggest wins have come in the month of March. So I thoroughly enjoy it. And a big part of that is I love fishing during the pre-spawn, and that's the title of this video, Pre-Spawn Progression, kind of understanding what those fish do throughout that pre-spawn. And that's, you see a big change in the month of March and what those fish are doing from, the 1st of March to the end of March. You really see a big change. And January, February, yeah, March has 31 days. So from the 1st to the 31st, you see a big shift in what's going on then. And that's kind of what I want to talk about, covering a little bit of how that progresses, based on water temperature. So this one is truly not one single technique, so much as, like how to fish a crankbait or how to fish a jerkbait. This is more about recognizing what stage those fish are in and kind of where they're going, what the next step and the next bait that you need to be using is going to be during the pre-spawn. And I've got 3 baits picked out here to kind of go through some of that and kind of what you're going to end up seeing. So let's see. Let's start with the jerk bait. Suspending jerk bait, staple bait during the pre-spawn. That's something that has long time been a bait that is always shined during the pre-spawn, and honestly something that we kind of pigeonholed a suspending jerk bait as only being good in the pre-spawn. We certainly know now that that is not the case. This is a bait that will catch on a lot of different times of the year, but it does probably shine, in my opinion, during the pre-spawn. Coming out of that winter time, it works well in the winter. But once you start getting those first few warm-ups, that's when a suspending jerkbait seems to really be a big player up until those fish get pretty close to spawning. Actually, big thing with a jerkbait is it's not an extremely dirty water bait, and I say that way on purpose. It does work well when you've got some color in the water. Now this is the new Rapala Maverick, and that's one of the more translucent colors, but some of the colors like the one that's straight white or white with an orange belly, those will work pretty well in pretty off-colored water. I've caught a lot of fish on a jerkbait when I've got a foot of visibility or 18 inches of visibility. So don't think that you have to have clear water to catch fish on a jerkbait, because that's just not the case. But it does work well in clear water. The erratic action of it, the natural colors that we've got, and this bait in particular are really good. But my very first cast with that Maverick, the first one that I had as a prototype, my very first cast, I was filming a monster bass show down in Texas, and I caught one. My first cast of that bait. So say I'm a fan would be an understatement. Excellent suspending jerk bait. But that is something I'm definitely going to be using a lot when I've got water anywhere from in the 40s, up into the 50s, low mid 50s especially. I'm going to be fishing that, suspending jerk bait, and just you're going to get more aggressive with that bait the warmer the water is, and you're going to allow longer pauses and fish the bait more subtly the cooler the water is. So keep that in mind. Adjust your pauses, adjust your action, really to fit that the water temperature. One thing on that, one key to think of And I learned this several years ago fishing a jerkbait. And I talked about fishing in a little bit more off-colored water. Water was cold. We were on Douglas. The water was 45, 46, I'm going to say. And it was pretty dirty. I'm going to say I could see a foot and a half or so. And I stop up there and I'm throw a jerkbait on this point. I mean, it's a good point. It's a place I catch fish this time of the year. And I'm like, man, this water's cold. I need to let this bait sit a while. And I throw it out there and I reel it down. I twitch, and I wait, 10 or 15 seconds. I twitch, wait 10 or 15 seconds. And I twitch, twitch pretty quick. Boom, I get a bite. And I noticed that bite came pretty quick after I had worked the bait. It wasn't after a long pause and then the fish, finally took the bait. It was, I twitched it and then the fish bit pretty quick. And initially I was jerking the bait pretty hard. I'd let it sit, but then I'd snap it pretty good and try to make that bait move a couple feet. What I ended up doing, and really got a lot more bites doing in that particular scenario, low visibility but still cold water, was working the bait more frequently but not trying to move it very far. So I'd make little bitty snaps with the rod tip just to try to make the bait move a little bit. I'd only let it sit a couple seconds, and then I'd move it again. I'm not trying to move the bait a great distance like I started off and then letting it have an extended pause. Little short moves, and I think in that off-colored water, the sound of that bait, between the hooks and a little bit of rattles, and this was with a different bait. I think that might have even been an X-Rat back then. But with the sound of the bait, those fish are able to hear it and they start coming towards it. Well, if you were letting it sit 10 or 15 seconds, man, they've not found it. Their attention span's probably, turned off of it at that point in time, and they've gone their other way. But if you made that bait make some movements, make some motion every few seconds, they were able to track the bait down, then able to find the bait. So just a little tip with fishing a jerkbait, especially if you've got a little bit of more color in the water. But again, it works well into that, from anywhere in the 40s up into the mid 50s. Part of that progression. Another one that definitely is going to work well in that temperature range is a shallow to mid diving bait. Of course, I love a flat sided crankbait, so a Shad Rap works well this time of the year. My OG baits work well this time of the year, and that deep tiny, that's one that really had in mind for this type of fishing. That stuff where you need a bait getting a little bit deeper. Those fish aren't quite up in those shallow flats and stuff yet. They're still out there on those transitions, whether that's a secondary point or a main lake point or those banks that just have a little bit deeper water on them, and you need something to get down in that 4, 5, 6 foot range. That's where that deep tiny is definitely going to come in and be able to fish out there just a little bit deeper. That bigger bill that it has on it compared to the regular tiny just help to get that bait out a little bit deeper where some of those fish are staging, in that range. This is a great bait to fish alongside of a DT6, like I mentioned, a Shad Rap. And it's a little bit smaller, a little bit more subtle bait than a DT6. So on those days when maybe you don't have quite enough wind that they're wanting to eat a DT really well, that's when tiny's really going to shine, that deep tiny. So definitely just keep it in mind for fishing alongside of those other baits. I still keep a DT6 tied on. It's a fantastic bait this time of the year. DT8's a good one to mention in there as well. But yeah, definitely a good option when they're kind of in that staging part of it. And again, in that anywhere in that 40s to low to mid 50s is kind of where I'm looking at. You get to the point to where those fish are really starting to transition, and I feel like I see that a lot. Once that water hits 52, I'll start noticing it some, and those fish, I'll start catching more of them in flatter places. You get to 53, 54, 55, and those fish absolutely start coming up and getting away from the bottom more, So that's something that with forward-facing sonar we're able to see a little bit more. So that cooler water temperature stuff, I feel like that high 40s, low 50s, those fish relate to the bottom. That's where they're wanting to be. But once you start getting in that 50, 52, 54, you'll start noticing that you just see fish that are just higher in the water column, and we can see that now. Those fish aren't relating to the bottom so much. What they'll end up doing is they're taking advantage of the sun rays coming through the water, and they know that top 4 or 5 feet of water is going to be a little bit warmer than that stuff that's down there 6 or 8 feet deep. And that's where a lot of those fish you're going to catch on that jerkbait You know, and as they're floating, you know, I just call them kind of floating in that 5 to 10 foot range. Those are fish that you can absolutely catch on a suspending jerk bait, whether they're relating to something or not. You know, if they're just out there kind of out over some bait or something, those are fish that you can certainly catch on that. But the part of that that really starts progressing, and I think a lot of people miss out on, is those fish that have been in that range and then now they're actually starting to get a little bit shallower. You know, if you start seeing a lot of fish on your forward facing sonar or start noticing that you're getting a lot of bites on a jerk bait or on something like that, just the first couple twitches. I mean, you throw that thing out there, you reel it down, that bait's not 3 or 4 feet deep, and you start catching fish like that. It's just how many of those fish and more fish probably that you'd actually catch on a topwater bait, and not just any topwater bait, but a wake bait in particular at that point in time. You know, that early season wake bait bite can be phenomenal. Can be a deal where you catch a lot of fish, can be a deal where you catch a lot of big ones. And honestly, you'll catch fish that you won't catch on almost anything else because almost everything else is going to be under them. To fish anything else that's truly going to stay above their head, you'd have to fish it really fast, you know, or some other type of topwater bait at all. So uh, being able to keep something up above those fish can help you catch a lot of them this time of the year. Red crest at Lake Norman in 2023, every morning I was starting, and most mornings I would catch a limit pretty quick on a wake bait. I had a couple pockets where those fish were pushing some bait back in, and it was those kind of deals where, you know, we had a warmer day the day before. The sun had got up, and a lot of times most of those days over there was pretty nice until the final day of that particular event. But most days, you know, it would warm up throughout the day. The water temperature would warm up 3 or 4 or 5 degrees. Of course, at night it might get cooler and that water temperature knock back a little bit. But those fish would run that bait up into the back of those pockets and stuff, and they'd still be back there early in the morning, and they'd really be feeding on them heavily then. I could go back in the back of those, a couple of those particular cuts, and catch those fish schooling on bait. I caught a couple on a jerk bait. I caught a couple on a swim bait, but a wake bait was far and away the best thing to get them because it was slow and it stayed above their head. Much like a suspending jerkbait does when those fish are down in 6 or 8, 10 feet of water, it's slow and it stays above their head. But once those fish are up in that 3, 4, 5, you know, foot range, you about got to throw a topwater to keep it above them, and that's where the strike zone was. So just really paying attention to exactly where that strike zone is and keeping that bait at or above, usually above, is a really important way to get a lot of bites that time of the year. So just follow that progression of those fish, you know, from being out on those staging places, on those, you know, on those main lake points and secondary points where you're going to catch a lot of them cranking and on a jerk bait. And then once they start going back into some of that stuff and really starting to sit a little bit higher in the water column, that's when you can just go all the way to the top with that wake bait and be able to get them to come up there and do it. Because the thing to remember, here's the deal with that. Last thing, I'll touch on that and we'll cover the rod and reels. Just like air, heat rises. That warmest water that you're going to see, and when it's warming at the surface anyway. The warmest water you're going to see is going to be in those top, you know, that top little bit of the water column. So don't think that a topwater bait that early in the year, 52 is kind of where I really start thinking about it. But 52 to 55, man, they will absolutely crush a topwater bait because it is the warmest water in the whole system that you're going to be fishing. All right, for the jerk bait, for that Maverick, about got me with that red line right there. The rod I like to fish it on, this Johnny Moore's Patriot. This is a 6 foot 6 inch medium action rod. I like that 6.6. That's one of the, there's only a couple techniques that honestly that I fish a 6.6 rod for anymore, and a jerk bait is one of them. A 6.6 medium action rod, 6/8 to 1 platinum reel, 12-pound tests. XPS fluorocarbon is my go-to line size for a jerk bait. I almost never vary from that. It really takes a special situation to go up to 14 or down to 10. 12-pound is my go-to for fishing a jerk bait in pretty much any situation. Next up for the wake bait, for it, something that this was the first year honestly that I fished some of these rods, and I fished several different models and really liked them. But that Johnny Moore Signature Series, it's that gray rod from Bass Pro Shops, but a 6/8 medium action worked really well for me with that wake bait this last year. and something yeah, it just fished extremely well. Johnny Morse Platinum reel on there as well, 6/8 to 1 gear ratio. Then I usually threw this on 40-pound braid, and then if it was clear water, like I was fishing that wake bait in a lot of times, I'd have a 17-pound. I just used fluorocarbon because I'm only using like 3 or 4 feet of it, but a 17-pound fluorocarbon leader on there. And a big thing with a lot of those wake baits, you know, having a little less weight on the nose and tying a loop knot will help the action of the bait some. So that's something that I do with it. But again, 40-pound braid, 17-pound leader is a really good setup with that on that 6/8 Signature Series rod. Then for the deep tiny, something you'll probably get tired of hearing me talk about is that Bass Pro cranking stick. That's just, man, that's the setup that I like to fish it on. 7-foot medium action. Again, that platinum reel, 6/8 to 1 gear ratio, and usually 12-pound test. I talked about this in the January video of why I would go to, you know, 10 or maybe even down to 8, but usually 12 on that is what you want to go with. But that medium action and that cranking stick is the best all around for that smaller bait there. But man, a great, absolutely wonderful month to get out there and get after it and catch a lot of fish this time of the year. Once those fish get up into that pre-spawn phase, that's the time of the year you can really find them loaded up. You know, whether that's on a particular point and find a good group of them, or just find back in a pocket where those fish have schooled up. Yeah, this is the time of year I go out. When I hook up the boat, I'm expecting to get a number of bites. You know, February can be a time of year where you're not catching a whole bunch, but you're catching some really big ones. March is the time of year I probably don't call it a good day unless I went to the lake and caught 20 fish or more, just because of what I know can happen out there this time of the year. So get out there, get after it, send me a picture of a big one you caught.